What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero back with another fiber format deck. And this deck is something that I think people have been looking forward to for quite some time, and that's Fiends. So if you don't know, or if you didn't watch my fiber format guide, the new set that got introduced in fiber format, Legacy of Darkness, actually had three sort of archetypes: warriors, fiends, and then dragons. Now, I kind of already covered warriors with this sort of Gearfried Blast with Chain deck. I don't think I'll return to that deck because I feel like that is the best warrior deck that you can kind of make. But that does leave fiends and dragons. So let's cover fiends today, and I'll be covering dragons at a later point, as that is the most janky of these sorts of decks, and thus will take the most time to actually get right. Now, don't get me wrong, Fiends is also pretty janky, but there are some sort of pretty easy to see strategies that you can go for. Mainly just trying to get out things like Dark Ruler Hades or Dark Necrofear, which are sort of the boss monsters of the deck and can be quite good. Hades is clearly the better of the two in my opinion, being a level 6 monster with 2450 attack that negates the effects of monsters destroyed by battle with fiends you control. And given how many monsters in this format really do want their effects to go off after being destroyed by battle, I mean, think Mystic Tomato, think Sangan or Witch of the Black Forest, or even something like Sinister Serpent, which will have its effect negated if it's destroyed by Hades. Like, it's very, very good to have Hades in the format, and I actually think it might be a better choice than Jinzo in the good stuff deck. It's still kind of debatable. I mean, Jinzo does have some benefits, as it can be revived from the graveyard. Hades cannot. So I do think that Jinzo is maybe better, but like, I think that there is an argument to be made for Hades here. In addition, we can play some very good fiends from, previous formats that we've talked about on the channel. Things like Giant Germ can be very strong. Sangan's also a fiend, and Yata Garasu is actually a fiend, so we are playing it indeed. And these can all be used to fuel things like your Dark Necrofear late in the game. There also is a very important trap card for this deck known as Bark of Dark Ruler. Bark of Dark Ruler is a trap. This is if a fiend monster you control battles, during the damage step, you can pay life points in multiple of 100, then target the opponent's battling monster. That opponent's monster loses that much attack and defense until the end of the turn. So this can be used as sort of like a battle trap to preserve your fiends on field. It can also be used, funnily enough, with Yata Garasu, as Yata Garasu just needs to inflict battle damage to your opponent. So if you're able to sort of attack Yata Garasu into an opponent's monster and then activate Bark of Dark Ruler, that can be pretty strong. So these are the sort of, cards unique to this fiend style of deck. And the other cards that we've included are just like general good stuff for the most part. So we've got 3 Mystic Tomato, which can be used to get into Sangan, Witch, or your Giant Germs. We've got, for our beaters, the Gemini Elves, Kaikus, and 1 Bazoo, given that, you kind of do want to preserve cards in graveyard for your Dark Necrofear later in the game. I cut this down to 1. It's nice to have as a search off Witch for when you need it, but you don't necessarily want to draw multiples of these when you don't want to banish cards from your grave. We've got an Exiled Force, which is searchable removal. We've got a Fiber Jar to reset the game state. This can also allow you to use Hades multiple times per game, which is very nice. So I do like this card in the deck a lot. We've got Injection Fairy Lily, which is a insanely powerful beater that you can search off Sangan when you're trying to close out the game. And then for the spells, we've got just the generically powerful suite. We've got Change of Heart, Confiscation, Darkhold, Delinquent Duo, 2 Graceful Charities, 1 Harpy Feather Duster, Monster Reborn, Triple MST, Painful Choice, Pot of Greed, Raigeki, Snatch Steal, and Forceful Sentry. For the traps, we've got the 3 Bark of Dark Ruler that I mentioned earlier. We've got a Call of the Haunted Imperial Order and a Mirror Force. Now, you'll notice that this does come up to 41 cards, and I could provide like a sort of argument for it. I mean, you've got a lot of cards that actually recruit things like Tomato and Giant Germ that you don't want to draw in multiples, so maybe, playing 41 cards will reduce the chances of that. But honestly, the reason why this deck is 41 cards is because I couldn't figure out what to cut. Maybe a Painful Choice, given that, there are less profitable sends off of this than there would be in another deck, but I do think that Painful Choice is still strong enough to merit inclusion here. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. The hand rips are all extremely good as well here, given that you are playing Yata and have more ways to enable the Yata lock, so you do want to be depriving your opponent of resources in hand. All the cards in this deck are really good, and, when you're playing this for yourself, you can choose one to cut, but I felt like it's, we're already playing a slightly janky deck. 41 cards should be fine here. For the side deck, I've sort of got a hodgepodge. We've got a Bazoo and a Kaiku in case we want to bring in one of those beaters for specific decks. We've got a Cyberjar, just to experiment with it a little bit, but there are some decks which it is good against. We've got a Sense of Serpent. If we're playing against like a hand control deck, this can be good to bring in. We've got a Heavy Storm for more back row focused decks. We've got 2 Moment of Crossouts and a Ceasefire for more flip focused decks. We've got a Scapegoat here just for aggressive decks. We've got Triple Jar of Greed, just to experiment with it. This card can also be good against sort of hand control decks as well. And we've got Triple Torrential Tribute against more aggressive decks. This can be good to bring in. The Fusion deck is just kind of like a hodgepodge of things, although I should probably update it for the LOD format here. But that's going to do it for the deck. Now that I've gone through the deck breakdown, let's dive into some games because I do think that we got some pretty fun games here to show off. Okay, we've got a game against Colgate, who's been a frequent guest on the channel. Happy to have them on, as always. We are playing the Fiend deck, and unfortunately, we will be going second, which, it's kind of rough, but it's not the worst thing in this world. I mean, this deck doesn't live or die whether it goes first or second, so I think it's ultimately fine, but oh, wow, this would have been an insanely good going first hand. Wow! Forceful plus duo. Whew, that's pretty good. Our opponent's just going to set 2 and pass back to us. We draw Dark Hole, which is okay. We could go for that, but I think I'm just going to go for the Mystic Tomato. Poke into what they've got. If it's something like a Sangan or a Witch of the Black Forest, we've got the Forceful and the Duo for that. Unfortunately, it's a Mystic Tomato, so they'll just bring out a Witch of the Black Forest here. Main 2, we are going to fire the Duo, because we're actually going to save the Forceful Sentry for their Witch Search, I believe. So we're just hitting these, and we see that they actually discard an Ashura Priest, which is a bit worrying, as Ashura Priest can deal with our tomatoes. So maybe that's a sign that we should go for the Forceful Sentry after this duo play. But I figure we hit that Ashura Priest out of hand. What are the odds that they actually have another? So we're just going to set this Spark of Dark Ruler pass back to them, and it turns out the odds of them having another is pretty high, although I think that was a top deck here, so I don't think that the Forceful Sentry would have actually affected this that much, rather than just like shuffling up the deck. Now they're going to attack into Mystic Tomato here, and we could just, shortcut straight into like a Sangan or a Giant Germ to pair with the Bark of Dark Ruler, but I kind of want to deck thin here. So I'm just going to bring out all these Mystic Tomatoes. They're going to keep attacking into those tomatoes, and yeah, we'll end on a Sangan here, so that way they'll try attacking in with the Ashura Priest. We can then Bark of Dark Ruler to get rid of the Ashura Priest. And the reason we bring out Sangan instead of Giant Germ here is, 1, it pairs better with something like Dark Hole, which we have in hand, if we want to use that. But more importantly, it doesn't indicate to our opponent that we're actually on a Fiend-based deck, so they won't be expecting the Bark of Dark Ruler here. So they're going to think about this, and they're just going to attack into that Sangan there, and then in damage, we will activate the Bark of Dark Ruler, and we'll just pay 800. We could honestly have paid 1700 and dropped them down by 1000, but I think it's ultimately fine. Damage matters a lot more in Fiber format, and we already are lower than our opponent in terms of damage, so I feel like we want to play it a little bit conservatively here. We draw another Bark of Dark Ruler, which is really nice. And we also draw a Painful Choice, which they are going to allow. We're going to send a bunch of backer removal, and then we're also going to send this Confiscation. The reason why we're sending all this backer removal is in case they've got like Imperial Order, we want to force that out in some way. And if they don't, then we've got the Confiscation to pair with the Forceful Sentry here. We can potentially clear the Witch with Dark Hole, and then, Forceful plus Confi, and we can search out a Yata as well. So we'll feel pretty good about that sort of situation. They're going to give us the MST here, though. Kind of unfortunate, but this is like insurance against an Imperial Order. We're going to go for the Dark Hole. They will get a search off the Witch here, and they do search first. So they're going to search out a Yata Garasu. We get to search out a Yata Garasu as well. And this is a sign that they probably do have something for our Yata Garasu, but, we are just going to play into it because we got to force that out, at some point. So it is a Torrential Tribute there, so that will get rid of our Yata. We do have Forceful Sentry, though, so we'll be able to see what they've got in hand. And we see that they've got Sousa Soldier and Yata, which means that this is a Spirit deck, which is very cool to see. I am planning on showing off a Spirit deck in the future, and it's cool that we get to see a bit of a sneak preview of that sort of thing with this deck here. Now, I do think that Yata is the more threatening card for us right now, given that we don't have any way to stop the Yata lock here. So while Sousa is pretty big, I think we do want to just send back the Yata. So that'll get shuffled back, and then, we're just going to set the MST. They know we've got it, but we'd rather have them use up an MST on our MST. rather than wasting the Bark of Dark Ruler for later. They're going to bring out a Sousa Soldier here and get in for just 1,000. The Sousa Soldier does have the battle damage that it inflicts. So they're going to set one and then add the Sousa Soldier back to hand, and that is fine by us. We draw Graceful Charity, which is really good here. We're going to fire that, and this is actually a pretty interesting hand here. I mean, either way, we want to keep the Pot of Greed. Hades is really good, but we don't actually have anything to tribute over it. I mean, we got Giant German hand, but there's no way to preserve both of these if we are keeping the Pot of Greed. So I think what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to discard the Bark of Dark Ruler and the Hades there. Then I'm going to go for a Pot of Greed, and Kaiku is a pretty great draw here. I'm going to bring out that Kaiku, attack in for 1,800. I could have gotten a bit more aggressive with this Monster Reborn, potentially bringing back something like a Sangan here. But I feel like I can save Monster Reborn for later, especially given that we do know about the Sousa Soldier that they've got in hand, which they will likely bring out to hit over Kaiku next turn. So I feel fine about just leaving the Kaiku here and saving Monster Reborn for when we actually need it. They are indeed going to bring out that Sousa Soldier and attack into our Kaiku. We'll just take 100 because, again, Sousa Soldier halves the damage. Sousa will return to their hand, and they'll pass back to us. Snatch Steal is useless against this deck, as none of their monsters actually stick on field, which is a very funny advantage that spirits do have. Because Snatch Steal is useless, we're just going to set it as a bluff. Hopefully that'll bait out an MST, and it indeed does. So they'll be able to, get rid of that, but that wasn't helping us anyways. And they're also going to bring out another copy of Sousa Soldier here, attacking in for 500. Again, Sousa Soldier halves the damage. They will also take 500 from that, and we'll be able to bring out 2 more Giant Germs. And we're actually feeling very good here. They're going to activate Spirit Invitation to try and sort of bounce our cards back to hand. This is a very neat continuous trap that basically says, whenever a Spirit monster returns to hand, you get to return 1 monster your opponent controls to hand. Honestly, this isn't like too bad for them to have. But I feel like we can get pretty close to winning the game next turn because we do have Monster Reborn to bring back Kaiku. If we draw a monster here, then we just win. So I think I am just going to MST that in the end phase. They're going to add that Sousa Soldier back to hand, and we just need 1 monster to make it work. That's not a monster, but it's still very, very good here. So it's a little bit risky to go for the Reborn, just, going for game here. Or not quite game, but basically game. But the way I figure it is, if we attack in with the 2 Giant Germs and the Kaiku here, that drops our opponent down to 800. So if they ever bring out another monster, and actually stick it to field, we can just crash into that with both of our Giant Germs, and they'll lose the game because that's 500 damage each. And we've got this Imperial Order to protect against board clears. Now, of course, if they've got a board clear plus an MST, then that's really bad for us, and we just lose the game. But I think that's, of an okay enough risk to, take. They didn't set a card here at the end of their turn, so, they might not have an MST in hand, as that is a decent set. So I feel fine about this. We're going to set the Imperial Order here and pass back to them and just hope. They do have the Dark Hole. We've got Imperial Order, and it looks like no MST, and that will be the end of the game. Let's see what they've got in hand. Yeah, they just had another Sousa Soldier and a Torrential Tribute, neither of which would actually matter here. So we are going to go into game 2. I think for game 2, I don't really change much. I think I just side out the Snatch Steal for a Torrential Tribute. I think, honestly, in retrospect, I could have also sided out things like, Raigeki or Dark Hole for some Torrential Tributes as well, as they're a little bit more useful against spirits. But I think ultimately it's fine. I mean, those are individually powerful cards, so it's not the worst thing in the world. And we do draw that Raigeki pretty early. They're going to set 2 and just pass back to us. That implies to me that they've got like a Torrential Tribute or something, but we might as well bait it out. We're going to bring out this Yata Garasu, and that's fine. So we're going to try attacking in. They've got Mirror Force for that, though. So, we baited out the Mirror Force on a Yata. I think that's a fine trade. And we've also got a Fiend Engrave for Dark Necrofear. We're going to set an MST here. They're going to MST that, and we'll pass back to them. They're going to go for a Graceful Charity here, drawing 3, discarding 2, Tomato, and a Sousa Soldier. They've got a Yata Garasu here, which is a little bit worrying. But we do have enough monsters in hand to hopefully get out of this okay. We won't be drawing next turn, which is a bit unfortunate, but we're going to try and bring out this Gemini Elf and just attack in. We know that Mirror Force is gone, so we're ultimately fine with this. They're going to Call of the Haunted here, and they're going to target Tomato. We could attack into the Tomato, but we don't necessarily want to get them into something like Witch or Sangan. And we do have Raigeki to potentially clear the Tomato. We're going to actually pass back to them because they can't actually clear the Gemini Elf now. And I figure, like, if they commit something like a Bazoo or something to get over the Gemini Elf and they don't have another Sousa Soldier, we can save the Raigeki for that. We don't really have an urgency here to fire it now. And, they fired Dark Hole to clear their own Tomato here. So I feel okay about, not using up the Raigeki at this point. They're going to bring out another Yata, though, which is, again, quite unfortunate. They're going to set one and pass back to us. And we're going to set this Mystic Tomato. And the reason we do this is because if they've got something like a Torrential Tribute or Trap Hole, we're just basically dead if we summon Tomato into that. So I'm just setting the Tomato, and hopefully this will be enough here. They do have Delinquent Duo to snipe the last 2 cards out of our hand, which is really rough. But then again, that Raigeki wasn't doing anything. I did have a kind of cute play to make with the Tomato where with Tomato we can get out something like Giant Germ, then crash those Giant Germs into our opponent's monster or something if they ever committed one to board, and then that would give us a Dark Necrofear. Or I could have brought out a Sangan, searched out Giant Germ, and that would have also gotten us into Necrofear territory. But unfortunately, it doesn't work out here. They do have a Premature Burial here to bring back this Tomato, and they will bring out a Yata as well. So they're going to try to just hard Yata lock us out of the game. Luckily for us, we do have the Tomato there. So we will be able to search out a Witch of the Black Forest. Witch of the Black Forest will enable us to search out something to potentially get over Tomato. And they won't be able to Yata lock us. So we finally get to draw. It's looking really bad for us since we're very, very low on card advantage. But never say never. Heartbeat Feather Duster is like one of the best draws we could have gotten there. Wow. We're going to fire that, clear an MST and a Premature Burial, which does also take out the Tomato here. We're going to attack in for 1100 and just pass back to them, which is a pretty good monster to stick on board, as if they clear it, we get another monster to hand. So we're feeling okay about this. They're going to bring out a Tomato and just hit into that Witch there. We will take the 300, and we could potentially search out Exiled Force, but if we do that, then they just get to Yata lock us, so it's not quite the best. So we're actually going to search out a Fiber Jar, trying to just, recoup any advantage that we could potentially get, as we are pretty low on cards, but we are high on life points. So I think the Fiber Jar is the best pick here. We draw Torrential Tribute, which is pretty good. We're going to set the Fiber Jar and the TT, pass back to them. And they're going to fire a Nobleman. Oof. I mean, at least we get information that they don't have any Fiber Jars in deck. It could mean that one is in hand. But we do know one card in hand is a Yata. So they are going to bring out that Yata and just try and Yata lock us out of the game. I think this is a fine play. If we don't have something to stop this, then they just win the game here. Unfortunate for them, we do have a Torrential Tribute, so that we'll be able to clear the Yata and the Tomato, and now things are a bit more equalized. We draw Injection Fairy Lily off the top, which is one of the best draws we could have gotten here. We're going to pay 2,000, drop them down to 1,700, so even if they take control of the Injection Fairy Lily with something like Change of Heart or Snatch Steal, they can't actually use its effect. And we're going to pass back to them. I feel really good about this. They're going to set a card here, pass back to us, and we bring out a Kaiku. And this has just turned out really, really good for us. We're going to attack into that set. And I'm pretty sure we win in most cases here, unless it's like Fiber Jar or a Cyber Jar. But unfortunately for them, it's a Sousa Soldier. So that will indeed be the end of the game. Wow. Last card in hand was a Kaiku as well. So, that would not help against the Injection Fairy Lily. But that was a crazy game here, and I mean, I think I only won this game too because of some insane top decks. But I do think that this match did show off some of the power of the Fiend deck. Bark of Dark Ruler did come up against an Assura Priest in game 1, which was really cool to see. And I think that play actually did, help us win that game a lot here. And also Yatas do come up. Like, I mean, multiple decks can play Yata here. As you saw, the Spirit deck is also playing Yata. Many good stuff decks also play Yata. But having the Yatas is very, very nice. And also having things like Dark Necrofear and Hades in the deck as late game bosses is very good as well, even if we didn't get to see them in this match. But this wasn't the only game that I played with the deck. Let's jump into another deck that's against a bit more of a standard matchup that you might see in this format. Okay, we've got a game against Dump Truck here, who is a frequent guest in the channel, and often, plays Fiber and is very good at it. They made it pretty far in the Fiber tournament that we've been holding on the Discord channel. And yeah, so this is going to be a pretty good one. We're still playing Fiends, and this is a pretty great hand going first, especially when we draw Confiscation. Wow. We're going to fire that Confiscation here and see what they're working with. They've got Graceful Charity, Raigeki, Tomato, Bazoo, and a Forceful Sentry here. I think, we could potentially take a monster, as we do have Imperial Order, but if we do that, then that, telegraphs that we do have Imperial Order. So I think what I'm actually going to take is a Forceful Sentry here. I feel like we can probably beat the Tomato or the Bazoo here with something like Witch or Injection Fairy Lily. So yeah, I'm just going to take the Forceful here, and then I'm going to just make a very simple play here, setting the Witch and then setting an Imperial Order and passing back to them. If they use Raigeki on the Witch, I'm perfectly fine with that. I think we want to save the Imperial Order for a Graceful Charity activation. They're going to go for Duo, though, and I feel like I probably have to just fire the Order on that. We can't afford to lose 2 cards from our hand, especially when our hand is this good. They're just going to set 1, pass back to us, and we draw Bark of Dark Ruler. We're going to pay 700. We know that they've got Tomato. We don't necessarily have a way to deal with that, so we're just going to set 1 and pass. We could potentially have set the Fiber Jar here, but I feel like we're still in a pretty favorable position given that we know what they've got. And all we need to do is just draw a good monster, and we've got the game on lock. So we're just going to keep passing. They set a monster here. And I'm getting a little bit worried. They're walling up pretty well. So I do think I'm just going to set the Fiber Jar, maybe try and reset the game pretty soon here. Unfortunately, they're able to reset the game before we can with a Fiber Jar of their own. And we are pretty low on life points here, which is a bit concerning. This is not how we wanted it to turn out. And yeah, this is quite rough. They have a chance to potentially get in for a lot of damage here. Or to just hand rip us into oblivion. And that the odds of that are not made much worse by that Graceful Charity. They're going to pitch a Nobleman and a Witch of the Black Forest, which is interesting. It implies to me that they might have like Call of the Haunted or a Reborn. But they're going to attack in with Tomato, set 1, pass back to us. Dark Ruler of Death is pretty great here. We're going to go for a painful choice, and that's fine. We're going to send the 3 hand rips, because why not? And then we're going to send a Sangan and a Reborn. And the reason we do this is because we want to get Dark Ruler of Death on field to hit over that Tomato. They're not going to probably give us the hand rips. If they do, I think we're ultimately fine with that. If they give us the Sangan, then, we can't necessarily bring out Hades this turn, which is unfortunate. But we do get a Sangan, which is nice. And if they give us the Reborn, we can Reborn back the Sangan, tribute over it for Hades. And I feel pretty good about that. So they're going to give us the Confiscation, actually, which is a very interesting choice here. We're just going to fire the Confiscation, see what they've got in hand. And that will actually go through. So we see they've got a Nobleman of Crossroad, a Gemini Elf, and a Jinzo here. I think of these, I'm probably most afraid of the Jinzo, because I want the Call of the Haunted online to actually be able to bring out the Hades like pretty easily here. Yeah, so I might be most afraid of Jinzo. Yeah, I am most afraid of Jinzo. So I'm going to send that from their hand there. They've got a Gemini Elf and a Knock here. We're just going to MST that back row. It is a Snatch Tool, which I feel pretty good about. And we're going to attack in with this Kaiku here. They'll be able to bring out something like a Sangan, which is a bit unfortunate, but we are able to hit out the Jinzo and the Witch of Black Forest there. Maybe I shouldn't have gone for the blind MST, given that if it was a Call of the Haunted, that would be really bad for us if they could have brought out Jinzo, which would have been pretty bad. But, I guess I'm rewarded for my greedy play. They're going to bring out a Tomato here. And we're just going to set this Call of the Haunted, passing back to them. Next turn, we can call back the Sangan, tribute over it for Hades, and that'd be pretty good. They unfortunately draw a Change of Heart off the top, which is a bit rough. They're going to try just attacking in for game here, playing around Torrential Tribute, which I do think is smart. Unfortunately for them, that will actually cost them this game. They're going to attack into the Sangan with the Tomato. We'll be able to search out a monster from deck, so we're just going to search out Yata. As I feel pretty good about being able to set up the Yata loop in a couple turns here. They're going to drop us down to 1,000, but we get Kaiku back at the end of the turn. We can tribute over it for a Hades, and then you just hit over their Tomato. That will indeed go through. They'll take 1050. And we'll pass back to them. They need to draw something off the top that can deal with Hades. But if they don't, we can just Yata lock them into Oblivion. And so I feel pretty good about our chances here. They're going to set 1, pass back to us. I think they're trying to bluff that they've got a Torrential Tribute, or they actually do have a Torrential Tribute. Either way here, I think we do just have to go for Yata and sort of call their bluff, as we can't let them draw into more things. Our game state is way too fragile at only 1,000 life points. Luckily, that does go through. If they get Mirror Force, this also is really bad for us. But luckily, that does actually manage to go through. And so I think we've won the game at this point. Our opponent's just going to set 1. We do know that that's the Gemini Elf. Or I guess we don't technically know, as the set could be a Nobleman. We're just going to, play it safe with the Graceful here. This does reveal more of our deck, but we can fire this Harpies just in case they were saving it for some reason. And we'll bring out this Yata Garasu. We know that that's a Gemini Alpha. We know the last card in hand's Knock, so this is perfectly fine. And that will indeed be the end of the game. So kind of a rough game, but we were able to pull it out, and Hades really showed how powerful it can be, hitting over that Tomato, depriving our opponent of resources, and then being able to just set up the Yata lock. that game worked out really, really well for us when it could have turned out really, really poorly. So we did manage to win that one by the skin of our teeth. Going to game 2, I don't think we make many changes here, as we are kind of like pretty sided against good stuff deck, and that is what our opponent is playing, it seems like. So we're going to be going second here, as we did win game 1, and this is a pretty good opening hand. Opponent's going to fire a duo, though, and that might make this a little bit worse. They're going to hit the MST here, which is honestly probably one of the better cards that they could have taken. They're going to set 2, pass back to us. We can't afford to not activate this Pot of Greed, so we're just going to go for it. Draw 2, and then we're going to think about exactly what to do here. We could just preemptively Exiled Force their set, but I kind of do like just summoning out Sangan and just poking in. If it's something like Sangan or Witch, then we won't have wasted an Exiled Force. And if it's something like Tomato, it will actually stay on field, so we can Exiled Force it next turn. It is indeed the Tomato there. We're going to actually just set this Bark of Dark Ruler, passing back to our opponent. We don't have any monsters in grave, so I don't really... Or do we have... No, we got a Tomato in grave from the duo. But I don't really think it's worth Call of the Haunting back at Tomato. I think it's much better to Call of the Haunted back as Sangan. They're going to attack in to the Sangan with the Tomato. We don't really want a Bark of Dark Ruler here, as they can just bring out another Tomato and attack into the Sangan afterwards. So we'll save that a bit. We'll take 400 here, and we're going to think about exactly what to get. I get a Tomato. I don't necessarily like this choice. I think that I probably should have gotten something else, but I honestly couldn't think of what to get. Probably should have gotten like a Witch or a Giant Germ or something. That would have been a little bit better than Tomato. I mean, I guess I was figuring like Tomato's a bit of a toolboxy card. It can get into either Germ or Witch, depending on what I want to go for. I've got the Exiled Force for their Tomato, so... I guess there's like reasons to get Tomato, but I'm already down a Tomato. I don't think I need to get another. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about this play. And we draw the other Tomato left in deck, so yeah, it really backfires on us. We're going to go for the Exiled Force here, because I do think that that's the right play. We'll set this Call of the Haunted to potentially bring back a Sangan. And we'll just pass back to them. They're going to go for Reborn, targeting their Tomato, which is very unfortunate. Our Tomatoes cannot win in that Tomato war. They're going to attack in for 1,400. We'll just take it. And then they're just going to set 1, pass back to us. We draw an MST, and we could potentially preemptively MST their new set, given that it could be MST. And if it is Mystical Space Typhoon, then Call of the Haunting back like a Sangan. Could be good if they chain it and target the call. But we're just going to go for call, trying to get back that Exiled Force. Unfortunately, it is MST, so we lose the call. And yeah, it's looking really bad for us. We'll set this Tomato, set an MST, pass back to them. At least we can potentially bring out like a Witch or a Germ here. Unfortunately, they do have a Raigeki to clear that Tomato. They're going to hit in for 1,400. They're just going to set 1, pass back to us. We draw Dark Hole, which is pretty good. We're going to Dark Hole away that Tomato, as that is a bit problematic, but we do lose our Tomato to a Torrential Tribute here, which is very unfortunate. I still think we're not in the worst position here. I mean, our back row isn't really that good, but we do have Change of Heart to make a majorly aggressive push. Unfortunately, they bring out a Sangan, which is a very good card for them. They're going to hit in for 8,000. And then they're just going to set 1, pass back to us. We draw a Delinquent Duo, which... we could go for it, and I think we will indeed go for it here, just trying to shut them off of anything in hand. If they draw into something like a Kaiku or a Gemini Elf, or honestly any beater, then we just lose the game here. But I do think we just have to go for this, just in case they've got something good to potentially win the game next turn anyways. And, I mean, we hit a Change of Heart and a Dark Hole, which is honestly pretty good to see off a duo. Although it might not matter in this case here. Looks like they didn't draw a beater, though. They're just going to attack in for 1,000, then just pass back to us. Unfortunately, Painful Choice won't quite do it. We're going to fire it anyways to try and get something to stop this Sangan. And so we're just going to send like a bunch of beaters in a Witch the Black Forest. So they're likely going to give us a beater. We'll take that. We kind of have to hit over the Sangan here, but we are going to fire an MST first, just in case they're set something like a TT or a Mirror Force. Unfortunately, it's just another Mystical Space Typhoon, so they will hit our Bark of Dark Ruler. Ultimately, that doesn't really matter much, but yeah, we'll hit into the Sangan with the Elf. They're going to search out a Giant Rat here, which will be able to allow them to get into Lily, but Lily doesn't quite kill us. It drops us down to 200. So it's not the worst thing in the world. We're in a very, very tough spot, but hopefully we can still crawl our way out of it. Unfortunately, Pot of Greed does not help, and Graceful is, yeah, it's not likely that we're going to survive this turn here. They bring out a Giant Rat. They've got the Premature Burial to bring back a Witch here, and yeah, they probably see the line, but we've just got to wait until we see the Lily on field, and there it is. And so that will be the end of the game. So kind of rough game 2 there. I think if I had, played the Sangan a little bit differently, maybe it could have turned out a bit better for us. But yeah, it was kind of rough there. So let's hope that game 3 goes a little bit better. I think I keep the deck largely the same again. Again, these decks are kind of like pre-sided for good stuff. Side decking works out like a lot differently in these old DM formats. So yeah, we're going to go for a painful choice right off the bat, sending the 3 hand rips, of course, but then we got to think about what the other 2 cards are going to be. We're actually going to send 2 Bark of Dark Ruler as, yeah, I'm not the most impressed with this card here, and I do think it's like not a bad card to get to hand, especially when we got a Sangan and a Germ to pair with it. So, yeah, I'm just going to sort of threaten the Bark of Dark Ruler here and sort of prevent them from attacking is my idea. We're going to bring out the Sangan, set the Bark of Dark Ruler, pass back to our opponent. They're going to go for a Graceful Charity here and draw 3. They'll then be able to discard 2. Discarding Jinzo and Fiber Jar, very interesting picks. They're going to Forceful back our Raigeki here. And, yeah, it's a bit rough. They've got perfect information now because they do know that we added a Bark of Dark Ruler, and that must be the set. So it's a bit worrying. They're going to bring out Gemini Elf, go to battle phase, but they aren't going to attack into the Bark of Dark Ruler. I think that's probably the right choice here. But they're just going to set 2, pass back to us, and Graceful Charity is a pretty good draw. We're going to start with a Harpy's Feather Duster here. Given that they know that we had it, they likely did have something here, but we had to go for it anyways. And yeah, they've got Imperial Order, so that will shut down that play a bit. They're going to chain a Scapegoat to that Imperial Order to also just get some bodies on field. Which I think makes sense. And we're just going to bring out a Giant Germ, attack into 2 of their tokens. I think we're actually thinking here about whether we want to attack into the Gemini Elf as well with our Sangan, given that we do have the Bark. But I like the Bark on field as like a deterrent to attack into our monsters. They're going to bring out Tomato, and that is a very good card against Bark of Dark Ruler, as, this if we Bark on the Tomato, then they'll search out another Tomato, and that'll be kind of a wasted Bark. So we're going to search out an Exiled Force here. They're just going to set 1 and pass back to us. We draw a Kaiku, which is pretty good. We're going to summon out Exiled Force, tribute it off for the Tomato, and then we're just going to attack into one of their tokens with the Germ. If they had something like Mirror Force, that'd be bad. But it looks like if they do, they're not going to use it yet. We're just going to pass back to them. We've still got the Bark, so I feel good about that. They're going to bring out a Gemini Elf here, and they actually are going to attack into our Germ. We're going to think about whether exactly we want to Bark this, and honestly, I don't think we do, because we kind of want to have the Germs on field to just be a major aggressive presence here. So we will indeed bring out those 2 Giant Germs there. We draw an MST a bit too late there. We're going to attack into a token. Now, we could potentially play around Mirror Force here by switching one of our Germs to defense, but I don't actually think that's a good play because then it sort of shuts off our Bark of Dark Ruler. So we've sort of just got to play as if they don't have a Mirror Force. If they do, we can always set the Tomato in main phase 2, which is honestly not bad for us. And unfortunately, it looks like that is what we're forced to do. But it's not a bad play, so I think it's ultimately fine. They're going to pay 7 again to keep the Imperial Order up, and they're going to attack into our Tomato. We're going to bring out another Tomato. They're going to attack into that as well. And we actually make a bit of a misplay here. We bring out Witch. I feel like, we should have just brought out another Tomato maybe, because if they want to clear the Tomato, they've, got to let Imperial Order lapse. Unless they've got like Exiled Force or something, which would obviously be very bad for us. But I think honestly we probably should have done that, as we don't want to let them get super aggressive. But yeah, I go for the Witch, and we draw Mirror Force, so never punished. We're just going to set the Mirror Force, and they are indeed going to pay another 7. Try and attack into the Witch. We've got the Mirror Force there, clearing their elves. And they're just going to set 1, passing back to us. We draw Change of Heart, which, on this board's not really useful, given that they've got IO up. But bringing out the Kaiku will force them to trigger a Torrential Tribute here, which enables us to get a Witch Search. And we're actually going to bring out a Gemini Elf. I could have searched out something like a Yata, just to sort of set up the Yata lock. But I feel like it's just better to get aggressive here. And while searching out a Gemini Elf is kind of unfortunate, because if they've got like a Bazoo in hand, they can just sort of camp on that, and we'll not be able to deal with that. I think this is ultimately fine. They're going to set 1 and pass back to us. We draw another MST. Not really useful here, but we can bring out this Gemini Elf attacking into their set. It's a Magician of Faith, so they're going to bring back a Graceful Charity. And that is both worrying and also kind of okay, because it means that they likely are going to let the Imperial Order lapse here, which means that our hand will be turned back on. So they are indeed going to do that, and they're going to fire Painful Choice. Always a scary card to see. So they're going to send a bunch of like pretty good ones here. But I think honestly, so we know about the Graceful in Hand, right? And giving them back the Serpent is kind of unfortunate as sort of a card to pair with Graceful. But honestly, I think that this game will probably wrap up like very soon either way. We've got Graceful Charity plus Change of Heart, and they're only at 4,000 life points. So if they do bring out a monster to get over Gemini Elf, I think we could just win the game next turn. So I don't actually care about them getting the Serpent to hand, and I'm just going to give them the Serpent. I mean, yes, if the game goes on for a bit longer than I expect, then that could be pretty bad, but I think it's better just to give them that in the short term than focusing on the long term here. Our opponent's going to bring out an Exiled Force, tribute that off for our Gemini Elf here. They're going to set one and pass back to us. We're just going to fire an MST in the end phase in case it's something like Scapegoat, which we do know that they're on. And they did leave their board open, so it might be. And that turns out to be the correct play because it was indeed the Scapegoat there. We draw into Dark Necrofear, which, I mean, this will probably end the game very quickly here. We do indeed have 3 Fiends in graveyard. All we need to do is draw a beater with this Graceful Charity, and we just win the game. So we're going to try and go for that. We draw a Reborn, which will also do it. We don't actually draw a beater here, but we can, you know, sort of flex on our opponent, set up the Yata, bring out Necrofear, and also Reborn back this Kaiku, and that will indeed be the end of the game. What have they got here? Yeah, they've got Graceful Charity and Darkle, so actually, if we had just, you know, committed the Necrofear and the Yata, it wouldn't have been enough. We needed the Reborn there, and luckily we did indeed get it. I mean, I guess we've got Imperial Order. Actually, we would have won here because we've got Imperial Order anyways. So yeah, the Yata would have been a way to do it. I mean, that would have been the sort of BM way to do it. But yeah, I think that this match really does show how powerful the late game bosses of Dark Necrofear and Dark Ruler Hades can be in this deck, as we did see them come up in major ways in both games 1 and 3, which we did win. So I do think that this deck has some potential in this format. I'm not sure it's necessarily like tier 1, but it can do some plays, and I do think that, you know, the power of things like Dark Ruler Hades kind of should be considered in good stuff decks, as we saw game 1, it can be very, very strong in sort of clearing your opponent's monsters that are kind of pesky to remove otherwise. I will say, though, you know, there are some cards in this deck that I'm not the most impressed with. Bark of Dark Ruler is an okay card. We did see it come up in game 1 of the previous match against the Seraph Priest, which was a very nice application. But it's just kind of like awkward. Damage matters a lot in Fiber format, and you have to pay a lot of life points with Bark of Dark Ruler, so kind of awkward there. Also, you know, if you don't have one of your Fiends, which, you know, you might not, given that you're not playing like too many Fiends in the deck, given that all the other Fiends kind of in the format past the ones that I'm playing are kind of bad. It can be a brick in a lot of situations. However, I do think the deck is very, very fun to play as sort of like a thematic deck in this format, and it does do some unique things, so I encourage you to try it out if this video piqued your interest. But what do you think of the deck? Do you think that the deck is, you know, better than I'm making it out to be? Maybe, you know, my build of it isn't quite optimal and I should add more Fiends? Or do you think the deck is a lot worse than I'm making it out to be and that I just got lucky in these games? Let me know it in the comments below, and also if you do like the content that I make on this channel, please do subscribe. I've got a bunch more Fiber videos on the way, and we're almost at 750 subscribers, and I've got a really fun 750 subscribers special planned if we hit that milestone. So definitely subscribe. Also, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like down below. It really helps out the channel a lot. But until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.